Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCS week number 3 overview and analysis video in the summer split. It's our final week before the big break, right before the Esports World Cup, and so I'm excited to go over the games that we got. Spoiler alert, it's not a particularly engrossing week in terms of gameplay, some pretty predictable outcomes, and definitely some not close games to talk about, but we're going to talk about them nonetheless as we do on this channel. If you want to know my thoughts on every single game that has happened up until this point, you can check out the playlist up in the iCard. That's of course every week of the season, as well as my primer. I recommend checking that out if you're interested in my coverage on the LCS, but it's not required viewing for today's video. Today we are just going to be going over everything that happened in week number 3, and of course giving our thoughts on where these teams are about halfway through the regular season. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice neat little bow. We will of course also be updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 8, talking about what teams moved, or in this case didn't really move all that much, because spoiler alert, again, there really just isn't a lot of weird outcomes happening right now in the LCS. Everything is pretty chalk, so we'll talk about that as we go further, but let's get right into the analysis. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much at the beginning of the video. Let's start off with day number 1, and we kick day 1 off with one of the more intriguing matchups of the week, if only because these two teams were talked about in a couple of different positions in terms of power rankings. It was Immortals taking on Energy, and Energy is going to pick up the 2-0 win here, and this is what I predicted. I've gotten a couple of comments, not only on here, but, on other social media platforms about how, Immortals should have probably been number 6 and Energy should have been number 7 in my power rankings, but I never expected Immortals to beat Energy, and so that's why, even with Energy struggling, not winning a game up until this point, this split, I felt pretty good about keeping them at number 6, and my patience with them is rewarded a bit. Don't get me wrong, Energy is still a team with a lot of negatives, with a lot of problems. They certainly have not, perfected the formula or anything like that. This is not a team that I think, oh, they looked good here, which means that they're actually, getting back on track. Immortals is just a lot worse, I think, than people are giving them credit for. I think people are looking at that win over Shopify and thinking way too much of it. I think people have way too much faith in the bot lane of Immortals, which I will talk about in just a second. But for Energy, player of the series was honestly a bit difficult because I do think everybody was valuable. I think there were multiple members that were really solid for the team. I think this was more of a team effort than it was 1 or 2 or even 3 individual players stepping up and dominating. I think all 5 ended up being really valuable in this series, but I'm going to give player of the series to Palafox. I do think it was a really close call. Just really like how he played in Game 2 on the Azir. I think it was definitely the most flashy game that anybody played, but I think realistically you could give this to Dokla on the top side, who definitely had his best game of the split, or best series of the split. FBI and Huki had their best series of the split by a large margin, just gapping Tactical and Ole in basically every single facet of the game on Kalista Ashe. And Contracts was really good as well, getting to play one of his signature champions in the Sejuani. There is something I want to talk about when it comes to that conversation. You've been hearing from a lot of analysts out there, top-end analysts. I'm not specifically referencing the dive, but they're certainly one of the ones that I'm talking about here, about how tank junglers have gotten worse and about how it's pretty ridiculous that most teams have it translated to AP junglers. I'll say it again on this channel. I know I've said it for other regions. I don't remember if I've said it for the LCS, but there is a reason that Sejuani and Maokai are never going to go out of meta. I understand their win rates aren't perfect right now. First of all, spoiler alert, the only teams that really play Maokai in the LCS are the bad ones, like Shopify plays Maokai, and that's why his win rate's so low. It really is pretty easy to explain with the context there, but also, generally speaking, AP junglers are very feast or famine in terms of your ability to play the game. It's all well and good to watch one of the best teams in the league go out and pick Zyra and Karthus and Brand and all of these champions and dominate on it, but, teams like Energy and Immortals, they're not able to do that at the same level. If they went for those same strategies, they would not be able to pull them off. You really do have to be the better team and the better jungler in order to make things like Zyra and Brand and Karthus work at the top level, work at the level that they need to be at. So I understand this idea that, we should be transitioning AP junglers and that teams are stupid if they're still picking Maokai and Sejuani. Like, I get the idea from a baseline perspective, but I think it really lacks context to say that, because then, you have series like this, and we'll talk about it, in the next series as well, where Sejuani just looks really good and is by far the most valuable thing that Energy could have picked here to, maintain their stability and allow the rest of the team to look good. So, again, contracts looked really good. Big jungle gap in this series. We'll talk about Armeo, who is just having a miserable 2024, but Palafox was very good. The Aurelion Soul scaled. The Azir was solid. Doklo, like I said, looked dominant up on the top side, was definitely better than Castle in the 1v1, and really just added a lot more value than him after that. In the mid game, in the late game, his team fighting was very solid. FBI and Huki both go deathless in this one. Huki in particular with a couple of really nice arrows. Just generally a very good series from Energy. Really not a ton to complain about from them. Maybe they could have closed it out a bit sooner, but I mean, that's nitpicking at that point. But speaking on Immortals, on the other side of this matchup, they're just not very good. I think people have just overestimated what they are. I think people want an arrow-led team to look good. I think people really like Tactical. Like, there is a weird obsession with Tactical kind of flipping around the narrative, I think, from the last couple of years, and I'm gonna be honest, I think Tactical's just a guy. Like, I think he's an average AD carry. I know everybody likes to say that he's like mega stuck, but I've seen what mega stuck looks like in other regions. I've seen what Jiwoo looks like on Nongshim. I've seen what Yukao looks like on Thundertalk. Like, I know what mega stuck looks like when you are on a really bad team. Tactical is not mega stuck here. I don't think I would put Tactical on any of the top 4 teams and feel good about that as an upgrade, and that's really not a mega stuck kind of situation for me. He's gonna get done of the series here. He makes a game-losing error in game number 2, but even outside of that, he was pretty bad this series. The laning was just really weak. FBI was just significantly more aggressive than him, and FBI has kind of reverted back to like the beginning of his career in terms of how he's played the game, where he's gotten back to being really strong in lane and very questionable as a team fighter, which is what he was on Golden Guardians when, he was there for his first stint before he went to 100 Thieves. That's kind of what Energy, or at least 2024, FBI has been, but even then, like, Tactical still got destroyed. Like, you have to at least survive the early game, and that just wasn't happening here on the Lucian Nami. They were not prepared to do that. Ole was also really bad here, another player who I think gets hyped up a little bit more than maybe he should because of the name value and because of just generally the reputation surrounding him. He's a fun guy, and he hit rank 1 in Korea very famously, and so everybody is just kind of waiting for him to be good. This bot lane has been below average, like, over the course of this whole year, and you're not going to hear a lot of analysts say that. I mean, you're really not hearing Reddit say that. They love Tactical, and so I do want to be a bit of a dissenting voice on that, and I think he's one of the weaker AD carries in the league at the current moment with how strong that position has become, at least in terms of depth at the LCS level. And then Armeo is the other player who is just not good. He's the worst player on this team. I think that's become pretty apparent. Like, there really just isn't a lot of positives to starting him anymore. I think, generally speaking, he is a player that would look better in a different circumstance, as I've said. For most of this year, he's the kind of player that looks really good when your lanes are winning and doesn't really do anything when your lanes are losing, doesn't have the mechanical skill to back that up. He honestly reminds me a ton of someone like Beishuan over in the LPL, and, I think their playstyles are relatively similar. They don't necessarily have the most mechanical skill in the entire universe, but they're smart players and they can gain advantages, but when those lanes are losing, you don't really have any ways to salvage that. So Immortals has their own problems. It's not like Mask and Castle are dominating either. It's not like they can salvage this team. Immortals is just not very good, and people have continuously been overestimating them. That win over Shopify is great, but Shopify is a disaster, and so is Immortals. And then for Energy on the other side, they're fine. Like, this doesn't change my opinion on Energy really at all. They looked good here, and perhaps this can spark something. As I've said a couple of times this split, Energy has historically started slow in terms of their ability to, like, win games. Even in their championship split last year, they were not particularly good through the first couple of weeks, and then they started to pick it up, got really hot heading into playoffs, and just kind of never looked back. I think that, is something that is theoretically possible for them. They could compete for a top 4 spot at, maybe even top 3 if everything goes right. I don't think it's going to happen. I think number 6 is still pretty accurate considering how they played. Beating Immortals isn't the end of the world, for them, but at least they were able to pick up that first win here, and their first win in a game as well. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 1, and it's kind of a pseudo-rivalry here in the LCS. For some reason, these two teams always play each other tough. It's 100 Thieves and Team Liquid, and unsurprisingly, Team Liquid is going to pick up the win. They're going to move to 3-0. It's a 2-0, so they move to 6-1 to start the year. They look really, really, really good. Everybody and their mother in the LCS is talking about how Team Liquid is the team to beat, and I agree, by far the highest floor in the LCS at the moment. I'm not sure if they have the highest ceiling. I've said that a couple of times just because I think some of their players could theoretically have problems if they run into, like, incredibly talented teams. Umti is somebody who's struggled with, like, mechanical skill in the past. There's reason to believe that they could potentially run into some issues in that that regard, but that is such a like high floor. Like their problem is never going to be, oh, are we like in the right position? Oh, are we set up enough? Have we prepared enough to be able to like make an impact on the game? That is never going to be an issue for Team Liquid, and I think that that's what makes them so difficult to deal with. It's why they're crushing scrims, and also just generally, like, this is such a great org and a great group of players for, like, grinding. Like, APA is a grinder, Impact is a grinder, Core is a grinder, Yon is a grinder. Like, these players are known for, you know, playing a lot of solo queue and, you know, practicing a lot, and so these are the results of that. It's getting better at a quicker level than everybody else around them, and they just continue their domination. 100 Thieves, to their credit, tried stuff in this series, and that's about the best I can say. This team continues to have very unique drafts. I really don't know what their Game 2 draft is attempting to accomplish, but, you know, at least they are attempting something different. The problem is, the top gap in this series was just absolutely ginormous. Impact is probably the clearest choice for player of the series that I could possibly give. He has been awesome at the start of this split. What a surprise. Impact being really good. But, you know, jokes aside, like, Sniper was pretty good in Spring. He was probably the third best top laner in the entire league. I had him as my third team all-pro top laner. He was my rookie of the split for the Spring split. And so there was a lot of good to talk about with Sniper. He's not a perfect player, and man, do we see that when he loses. When someone like Impact comes out and just, like, wants to dominate, when he picks Mordekaiser, when he picks Cassante, all of a sudden the games become a lot easier for them to win, and that's exactly what happened here. Impact brutalized Sniper, specifically in that first game, completely took the Skarner out of it. I understand that basically every LCS pro thinks that Skarner is unbeatable right now, but Mordekaiser's a pretty darn good counter. It actually takes away a lot of the positives that Skarner wants to have in some of the late fights, and Mord, as I said in my LEC video that came out, I think the same day that this is coming out, is a champ that I don't really understand why he's not picked more in competitive. I think he offers a lot of unique things, even if his numbers are rather low. So Impact pulling him back out here, dominating, looks great. The Cassante was just as good in Game 2. We know Impact is very good at Cassante. That was proven at MSI. So for Liquid, you know, honestly, if you can rely on your top side as much as you could in this series, you're going to be just fine. But it wasn't just them. Like, APA dominated, got his signature Ziggs in Game number 2, and lived up to the hype. Like, he was probably the best player in that second game. Impact was very dominant in the first one, but Impact was probably a little bit more consistent over the course of the series, which is why I gave him player of the series. But APA really has cemented himself as one of the best mid laners in the region. Yon and Core are far and away the best bot lane in the LCS. It's not even remotely close. I tweeted something out last week that was, you know, talking about how Core was like, we're probably the best Lucian Nami in the West. It's not close. Like, it is not even remotely close. They dominated on the Lucian Nami. They were good on the Zeri Alistair as well. There really just aren't a lot of, like, negatives I can give this team. Umti's picking tanks, and everybody's real upset about that because they want him to pick carries, because I think it'll lower the upside of the team to pick Sejuani, when it, you know, the reality of the situation is this really increases the consistency of this team. Is it a shock that Team Liquid is the only team that's consistently gone to tanks in the jungle for the entire year, and they're the only ones that continue to win basically no matter what? Like, I get it, I understand it, but I really want to push back on this idea that AP junglers are the only way to play the game. We've seen this in other regions, that the good teams are really good at AP junglers, the bad teams are really bad at AP junglers, and so I understand why, as a unit, you might just want to play Sejuani, you might want to play Maokai and just grab that consistency, know what you're getting on a game-to-game basis, even if the highs aren't nearly as high. I think it's a valid strategy. So for Liquid, I understand, you know, the drafts, even if people are confused by them in Game 2, it's just as prototypical as Team Liquid gets. A really good series, especially from the three laners, Impact, APA, and Yon. And then for 100 Thieves on the other side, you know, they're fine. I think people, again, kind of similar to Immortals, overestimated this team after a really nice Week 1 win. It was a really nice win over Energy that is not really aged as well as maybe you would have wanted. It's not exactly the biggest upset in the world, and, you know, Quid pulling out the Ezreal mid, and there were a lot of fun storylines surrounding it. I think this team still has some major issues, and the questioning that I did of them in the midseason, you know, wondering if they were going to be able to get back to the heights that they were at in the spring split, I think that that's reasonable, especially with a team in Dignitas that is just straight up better this split. I think 100 Thieves moving down to 5, essentially going from the 4th to the 5th best team because the team got better. I think that that's a pretty fair thing to say, and this is them playing essentially how they played in their losses. There are positives. River and Quid continue to be able to gather resources, even if it is at the expense of the rest of the team, but the young players did not pick it up here. Sniper was awful in the top lane. Like we said, he's going to get dead of the series. There's really not much to say. Just got obliterated in Game 1 by the Mordekaiser counter pick, and then the Renekton was also not very good. He's a young player. He's also a very aggressive player. He is known to lose bad matchups, and so I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to freak out about him losing it here. And then Meech was the other player who I thought was really bad in this series. Meech has actually been pretty okay, I would say, over the start of this split. He's actually really impressed me with his ability to play carries. It was something he wasn't asked to do a ton in the first split in the LCS, and obviously he basically exclusively played hyper carries in the NACL. He was kind of known as the player who received a lot of resources as an ADC in the NACL, came up to 100 Thieves and was this super low resource Senna bot laner and just kind of played the FBI role, if you will, and it worked for this team, but they wanted to go towards more hyper carries in a meta that I think is pretty advantageous for that. Meech has been able to step up and fill that void, but his Ashe, not so much. Like, it doesn't really track on the same level. Ayla didn't really have a lot of success. I do not know what the Seraphine is even supposed to do in game number 2. I just don't even understand the idea of the pick, and I do think that they're cooking a little bit too much by continuously going to this Ezreal mid. This is not some uncounterable pick. This is something that can be dealt with, and it has been dealt with by multiple teams now. So, you know, there are positives for 100 Thieves. Again, I think Quid is still playing well, River is still playing well, and they are, at the end of the day, the heart of the team. If they are playing well, then at the very least you're going to have a pretty nice floor. But I'm not sure if the upside is as much as some people would have made it out to be at the beginning of the split. And then for Team Liquid, like, they're one of the best teams in the league. They are the best team in the league right now. The reason, again, that they're not number 1 in the power rankings is just I imagine that the team that is number 1 is going to get there eventually, and that's kind of my thought process. But right now it's just really hard to argue that Team Liquid isn't clearly the best performing team in the LCS. And then moving on now to day number 2, and this was probably the most predictable outcome of the weekend. It was Shopify Rebellion taking on Cloud9, and again, predictably, Cloud9 was going to pick up the win here, and they didn't really struggle. This was a 2-0 and a very, very fast one. Cloud9 continues to look amazing at the start of this split. I think people are, you know, kind of waiting for them to struggle. Their schedule's been relatively easy, at least in comparison to maybe some of the other top teams. They've yet to play either Team Liquid or FlyQuest. They have beaten Dignitas, though, so it's not like they've, you know, only played Immortals and Shopify, but it certainly gets a little bit easier when weeks 2 and 3 are Immortals and Shopify. So, you know, it's definitely good to see this team performing well at the moment, but we'll see what happens when their schedule starts ramping up. And for Shopify on the other side, this team is just a disaster. Like, they are the worst team in the LCS, and it's not even really particularly close. I don't think teams like Immortals or Energy or even 100 Thieves are, like, exceptional. I don't think they're unbeatable. Shopify is just so far below them. Like, it's a tier gap, and that's really disappointing. I think a lot of these players did show a lot of interesting things either in tier 2 or in different regions in B-Boy's case, and it's just not coming together. Everything is going about as disastrously as it possibly could. This is worst case scenario for Shopify, and, you know, there's really not much else to say. We can quickly talk about these games, but really at the end of the day, these games were boring. Like, this was the most boring series of the weekend, and it's not even remotely close. Cloud9 just out macroing, outplaying in every facet of the game Shopify. Like, this was never going to be a series that was close or even really fun to watch. Shopify got 2 kills. Both of these games went sub 25 minutes. Like, it was just utter dominance. Player of the series, like I said, in the first series of the week, could go to basically anybody because it really was just a bit of a team gap across the board. I'm going to agree with the consensus, and I'm going to give player of the series to Thanatos in the top lane. This was his best series by far, but again, it's Shopify. How much do you really want to put stock into that? This was definitely his most complete series as a player. His Renekton was absolutely disgusting in game number 1. Like, he played that matchup incredibly well. Fake God has really struggled at the LCS level. He was not very good in spring. He's been even worse so far in summer, just like the worst top laner in the LCS, which again is very disappointing, especially if you followed this channel, because you know how big of a fan of Fake God I was. Not only going into this year, but I've essentially been a huge fan since 2017, since he's been given an opportunity, and unfortunately it's not coming together for him. Thanatos definitely starting to live up to the hype. We knew it would take him some time to get going. I've always been a bit lower on Thanatos. As I've said in multiple videos in the past, I've always thought he was an okay top laner in the Challengers League. I never thought that he was all that dominant. I never really thought that he was like this exceptional player that everybody made him out to be. He was a really talented young prospect, but somebody who did need some time to grow. I don't think he was Berserker coming in, who was just clearly better than the players he was playing against and was always going to dominate like the LCS competition, like mechanically speaking. I think Thanatos, it was expected for him to take a bit more time to get going, but the upside is definitely still there, and this was a very good showcase of that. Speaking of Berserker, he's still playing much better in the summer split down in the bot lane. I thought Vulcan actually had a really good series. I think the bot lane has been much more about Vulcan than it has been about Berserker. Berserker's obviously struggled, and he's not been the star that he has normally been, but he's not been nearly as bad as I think some people would make him out to believe. I think Vulcan was horrible in the spring split. I think he had a lot of games where he just really had a lapse in judgment, where he was making bad decisions. I think especially on rewatch when I was doing tape analysis analysis for the primer video at the beginning of this split, I really realized how bad Vulcan was and just how little there was to do for Berserker in a lot of those 2v2 laning phases. So Vulcan playing better, I think, is definitely a positive. I've always been high on Blabber and JoJo. They were the strength of the team in spring. They were the reason they got top 3 at all. And I'm not surprised to see them continue to play well. JoJo is still an absolute star, and honestly, at this point, JoJo is underrated. I know Blabber got a lot of credit last year, or last split, but JoJo was amazing. For Cloud9, for most of that split, he was their best player, and he continues to be kind of a rock for them, so I'm not worried about Cloud9. This is a good win, and I am worried about Shopify, but, like, I'm not really. Like, I'm not thinking about Shopify anymore. This team is just kind of done, dusted, in the water, if you will. Zeyzal's gonna get done of the series. He has really had a down year. Like, he has not been good for this team. Fake God has not been good. Tomio has not been good. The DSG boys have really not translated to the LCS all that well, and obviously that's a bit of a disappointing sentence, but, you know, for Zeyzal, who I guess was slightly better in spring, I think B-Boy did a lot of the bot lane work, but bot lane was definitely better for Shopify in the spring split. It's just disappointing to see even that start to fall off in the summer split. You know, you already were having problems in the jungle. I think Tomio has so far been a clear downgrade to Boogie, who was just better than what Tomio is right now, and, you know, shout out to the Maokai discourse, everybody talking about how Maokai is not a good champ anymore. Tomio played 2 games of Maokai. Hell yeah, his win rate's gonna go down. Like, just kind of how it goes. Shopify's not very good. And, you know, it's not like the rest of this team is picking up the slack. Fake God has been probably the worst top laner in the league over the course of this year. Insanity, I think, has certainly taken a step back after a really strong 2023, and so there's just not really a lot to like about this team, and quite frankly, there's not really a lot of avenues for me to see them getting better. I think it's going to rely on, you know, either Zeyzal, Fake God, and Tomio just figuring it out and getting better, you know, Tomio getting adapted and more comfortable playing in the LCS, and Zeyzal kind of getting back his form, or more realistically, it's going to be B-Boy dragging them to win, and Insanity doing his best to not let the inner demons win and continue to only pick ADs in the mid lane. I know it's in meta right now, and so it does kind of end up working out. I'm surprised the Graves has not been brought out so far this split. That seems like something that would end up actually working in a meta like this, but, you know, Shopify just, they don't really have a lot going for them. Their drafts are bad, their play is bad. It's just not good. They're one of the worst teams in the world. And then Cloud9, they are good. Should they be number 1 right now? You know, I don't think they've done anything to not be number 1. I don't think they've proven that they aren't the best team in the league. I think, again, Team Liquid has the highest floor, which is why, you know, they are kind of talked about by everybody as the number 1 team, because they probably are right now, but I expect Cloud9 to continue to get better. I always thought Thanatos was a work in progress, and he has gotten better fast. I think the bot lane's been better. You know, we'll see what happens when their schedule starts to ramp up. Don't be surprised if this team drops some series that they're maybe not supposed to against teams like, you know, FlyQuest and Liquid and maybe even like 100 Thieves. Like, I could definitely see that being a reality for Cloud9, but even through all that, I'm not really sure I wouldn't expect this team to still be the best by the end of the year. And then moving on to our 4th series of the week and our final series of the week. As per usual, it was the matchup everyone was most excited to see, the rivalry that has really grown over the course of this year with all of the trash talk that's happened, with all of the conversation surrounding these two teams. It was Dignitas taking on FlyQuest. And FlyQuest is going to get the upper hand. The villains win again. Everybody is oh so angry on r/League of Legends, but jokes aside, this was a phenomenal series from FlyQuest. They were favorites going into this. I think reasonably so. Dignitas still has some flaws that they need to overcome, but I don't think anybody thought the series was going to be as non-competitive as it was, because it really wasn't. Like 2 blowouts here from Fly. They absolutely torched them. Clearly, this team showed up to play. Clearly, they had a bit of a vendetta against Dignitas, and it was kind of fun to watch them just go out there and play some of the best League that they played all year long. This team did do really well in the regular season and in playoffs last split. Like, second place is nothing to scoff at. You know, they were first in the regular season by a pretty clear margin. There was a lot to like about how FlyQuest ended up playing last split, but even so, I think this might be the best series they've played, and it's certainly the best series for a couple of their players. Player of the series is going to go to Busio. This is probably his best series ever as a pro, like, including his 100 Thieves year last year. I think this is his best series ever as a, you know, a member of a professional League of Legends team. Like, this was unbelievable. The Renata in game 1 that single-handedly won lane, and then the Poppy that just obliterated the game. Like, there was literally no way to play around it in that game 2. he looked like Mickey X at MSI, and that's usually not a good thing, but in this case it was a good thing. So congrats to Busio, this was incredible. He's honestly leveled up a lot since coming over to FlyQuest. I think he's been underratedly good. I've been a little bit hesitant to kind of crown him as one of the best supports in North America because there are still flaws and champion pool is still a bit of a problem, but that's becoming less and less true. I think generally speaking, this year has just been significantly better for him than 100 Thieves was last year, and year 2 is usually the time where you want to see that big leap. Typically speaking, we're actually seeing a lot of players play well in year 1 and then struggle a bit more in year 2. It's kind of been the opposite for Busio, which I think is a good thing. The rest of this team, though, also dominated. Masu was unbelievable. The Ezreal in particular in that second game, he couldn't miss a Q. And I mean, he dominated game 1. They won a 2v3 down in the bot lane with the Kalista. Just beautiful stuff coming in from Masu and Busio, who were the carries of this series. Inspired looked excellent. Talia, Karthus, whatever you need him to play. He really fits this AP jungle meta because he likes to scale up so much. He is kind of a team fight first kind of jungler. It's why Viego was always kind of his signature pick. Karthus fills up a decently similar role, if a little bit different in terms of execution, but, you know, he's really good at these types of champions. Bwipo was awesome, completely crushed Licorice on the top side of this map. Quad was really good in this series, definitely destroyed Jensen. The 1v1 really wasn't close at all. FlyQuest just kind of gapped them all over. I think the bot lane was definitely the most noticeable part, but they were good everywhere, and Dig was just kind of bad everywhere, and after all the shit talk, it's definitely a bit disappointing, but again, is it really all that surprising? Like, are we really shocked that Dignitas did really poorly in this series? Like, they weren't favorites. I think I expected them to put up more of a fight than this, but you know, they drafted some aggressive and risky comps and it ended up not working out. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Sven in the bot lane. This Kai'Sa was just miserable, getting 2v3 to, you know, constantly. Like, he was in good positions. The matchups really aren't all that bad so long as you can survive the early game, but he couldn't do that. The 2v2 was a nightmare in the bot lane for Dig. Isles is definitely to blame for that as well. But I thought Sven's positioning was just straight up worse. Like, the Kai'Sa was just so bad and constantly out of position. He did not feel comfortable on the champ, and I don't really know what to tell you. This was a significant downgrade from the player of the week last week, so definitely a bit disappointing there. Spica also on the Nidalee. Like, what are we doing? Like, I understand that Nidalee is a very popular pick, but it continues to be bait for anyone that's not like a top 3 to 5 jungle in the world. Those players are doing so well on Nidalee. We've seen Kanavi and Canyon and Peanut and all of them play Nidalee at such a high level, and then everyone else tries to pick it up, and it just goes so utterly horrible. It's honestly kind of ridiculous to watch. I need Spica, and I need LCS teams to just stop picking Nidalee because it was not good. In game 2, Jensen just got completely outplayed, like, overestimated his abilities. In game number 1, he dies under turret for no reason on the Tristana. Just disappointing, and Licorice was just taken advantage of in the top lane as well. Not a good showing from Dig. Hopefully they can, you know, keep the mental. I know a lot of these players were really hyped about this matchup, and to lose it so convincingly is definitely disappointing, especially because it's single round robin. You might not play FlyQuest again the rest of the year, which would definitely be disappointing in terms of storylines and interest here in the LCS, but at the end of the day, like, it's just one loss. Like, you have to be able to put it on the back burner. FlyQuest is a really good team, and they were motivated. You just kind of chalk it up and see if you can get better as the year goes on, perhaps solidify your drafts a bit more, and then for Fly, this is the kind of dominant performance I wanted to see. This should still be a team that competes to win the LCS, not just be in the conversation. They might be the second best team in the LCS right now, depending on where Cloud9 actually is. I'm really excited to see those two teams face off because I think it will be very telling how that series goes, but FlyQuest is certainly not a team you can take lightly. All of their results have proven that, and, you know, I think MSI was definitely a bit of a, you know, wake-up call for them, and I think they've learned a lot from it, clearly. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCS week number 3 overview and analysis video here in the summer. Split up on the screen now, the updated standings after 3 weeks of LCS action, and I'm excited to talk about it. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically. We're starting to get to the point where ties are slightly less common. Hopefully that continues to get better as we go throughout the rest of this split. You know, ties are obviously pretty annoying, but no favoritism attempted to be shown here, no bias. And then, of course, on the right of every single team, you will see a couple of things. First, power rank. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 8, and changes how they have changed from last week to this week. And for the second week in a row, no changes. You know, there are only 2 possible theories towards why this continues to be the case. Either A, I'm the biggest genius in the entire world, and, you know, I've never gotten anything wrong, and my analysis of these teams has been spot on, and yada yada yada. Or, more realistically, the LCS is just really predictable right now, that the teams that are supposed to be good are winning, and the teams that are supposed to be bad are losing. Hopefully things start to change and get a bit more complex as we head into the second half of the year, coming off of the break here, and, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how teams respond to that. Some have a lot of extra time than others. Of course, Liquid and FlyQuest going to a tournament. The rest of these teams are just going to be scrimming, so we'll see if anything ends up changing, but no changes in power rankings. I don't really feel the need to change anything, and so this is going to be a relatively short segment. For the second week in a row, I am going to ask the question, do you agree or disagree with me not changing my power rankings? So far, it's really held up. Me having faith in FlyQuest over Dig was a good call, and me having faith in Energy over Immortals was a good call. Do you think that those will stand true? Do you think any teams are underperforming where my power rankings are, overperforming where my power rankings for them are right now? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything down below, but let's move into my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 3. Player of the week was a really easy choice. It's going to go to Busio, the support for FlyQuest. That series just was so dominant from Busio, and as you can see, an honorable mention to Masu. They were 2 of the 3 best players in the LCS this week. That bot lane just utterly dominated Dignitas, specifically their bot lane, but also the rest of that team as well. It just was an utter disaster for them, and Busio was the biggest reason. Hell of a week from him, hell of a game on Poppy in particular in game number 2, but Masu was also great, and I want to give a big shout out to his Ezreal. Those two have really started to come along as one of the scarier bot lanes in the LCS, and that's a really good sign for FlyQuest. But the other honorable mention, the other runner-up is going to be Impact, the top laner for Liquid. Again, he brutalized Sniper, who we will just talk about in a second for dud of the week, but Impact was fantastic, and again, he's been great for forever. You know, I'm a little bit lower, quote-unquote, on Impact because I like to point out that every time Impact is on a team for more than 2 years, he starts to get bad, and so he's got to keep switching it around. It's a really funny little pattern, but his first year on every single team, the best year you could possibly get. It's how it ends up working, and at this point, Impact has had significantly more good than bad, even if he can be a bit inconsistent in the 1v1s. In lane, like, it doesn't really matter. There's no LCS top laner that can really take advantage of that. And then dud of the week, unfortunately for me, is going to go to Sniper. You know, I like Sniper. I'm a fan of his, but I thought there would be growing pains. There weren't as many as I thought in the spring split, but it does seem that with the talent level increasing, at least for the most part in the LCS, Sniper has definitely failed to adapt to that as much. He's not been nearly as explosive. The 1v1s haven't been nearly as good, and obviously running into Impact isn't ideal, but this is far from the only bad game he's had so far this split. I just want to see him get a bit more consistent. He is a very, very fun player, but, you know, if the bad matchups do ruin him in the way that they are ruining him right now, it's going to be a bit difficult for him to emerge as one of the best in the entire region. I still think it's possible, but unfortunately, he's going to get dud of the week here, and Busio is going to get player of the week. 2 former teammates there, very funny, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS, we post about all 4 of the major regions. It's the LCS, LEC, LCK, and the LPL every single week that they play here on this channel. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Also, of course, we cover the NACL every single week. That's tier 2 here in North America, so definitely check that out if you are interested. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.